Hi, Sasha.
Hi, Steve.
Nice to see you.
Good
Thanks for coming to visit me at my new Freedom of Mind headquarters in Newton, Massachusetts. And a lot's going on with Scientology. We're in November of 2012, and maybe I'll just ask you to tell a little bit about your interest and background.
Sure, happy to do so. Yeah, I was born and raised in Scientology in Los Angeles, and I got to know Scientology quite well. My mom achieved the state of OT7, my dad OT5, and I achieved the state of clear. I went to Delphi Academy. I pretty much exclusively had Scientology friends and a community around me, which was what I knew and what I believed was my future for the rest of my life. And through a series of events, car accident that I had, and it made me rethink about Scientology and its surroundings and about who L. Ron Hubbard was, or is, yeah, I guess was, and what it meant for me and my own spiritual belief and growth with it. So I don't know, it would be best for me to kind of go through that background.
So let me just cut to the chase for people who may not know you. So you were born in Scientology, is that fair to say, and raised with Scientology principles and beliefs. And we've talked in the past about Delphi and the problems with that education and that experience. Is it safe to say that you've left it and you're doing well in your life?
Oh yeah, no, having come to the other side, I mean, that cut to the chase part of it, yeah, I mean, I left it about 1990-ish, so it's been almost 22 years, and it's sad for me that some of my friends have chosen not to stay friends with me. Some of them remain Facebook friends of sorts, but now I'm married with 3 wonderful boys. I'm working, doing quite well, and happy with my life, and the Scientology context that I knew, while I have some fond memories, because truth be told, I actually don't have huge complaints about my childhood, except for the fact that it was, for when it came time for me to think about maybe this isn't for me, the very structure that Scientology had, which was either you're in or you're out. You either believe in it because that's the keeping Scientology working, or you're out. And me trying to sort of stand on that fence, actually, I had one of my best friends say, well, clearly you're not in. And that was when I realized, okay, well, unfortunately for me, it's because of that I had to say I'm out. And then I was able to sort of look at the world outside of Scientology and build and create a new life, which at first was actually quite challenging, but I found such a beautiful life. And I've been in correspondence, you know, I have old Scientology friends that went to high school with me that have made an effort to try and get me back in. And I've done my best to share with them my experience of having left. It's hard for me because I know from that perspective of being in, how you understand the overts, the withholds, whatever there could be some misunderstandings, whatever it might be what it is that makes Scientology work and why you have to follow the tech. And knowing that, but then being on the outside where I say, well, I do recognize that, and you could argue all kinds of different overts, withholds, and I, in my own world, feel clean with who I am with respect to Scientology, and am happy with who I am, and actually live what I'll say, a freer life, a more open life, with a more open dialogue than I was in Scientology, with trying to figure out, well, what would the community think, or what would people think, or do I have these overts, do I have these withholds, and get into this vicious cycle.
Right, so as you probably know from my books and such, I talk about phobias and how mind control groups of all types, religious cults, political cults, therapy cults, etc., business cults, all instill phobias, irrational fears that terrible things will happen to you if you leave. Sometimes that power of indoctrination actually causes the person to do bad things, whether it's, you know, do drugs or harm themselves or something else like that. But in some cases, people have actually freaked out from the processing in Scientology, or other groups have freaked out. They've gone to emergency rooms and they've been designated as acting crazy, but they weren't crazy. They were reacting to a crazy situation and these phobias that were in their mind.
Sure, yeah.
And so I just think it's incredibly important and valuable for people like yourself who've been born there, your parents are in there, and is it correct to say that they both left Scientology, the OT7 and OT5?
Yeah, my mom left without me knowing because she didn't want to put me in the difficult spot of having to choose between parents, and there certainly were other classmates of mine at Delphi that had to go through that, and inevitably most kids would say, I'm going to choose all of my friends and the parent in because it's a community that they know better than having to take that jump. And so my mom was
protecting you.
In a sense, yeah. So she kept it quiet. My dad was a very adamant Scientologist, and I had to leave, and unfortunately for a short period of time at the cost of my relationship with my dad, which was not, it just was part of how, I guess, the structure of Scientology trying to get me in, my dad trying to do the right thing, all that stuff. But I knew what was right for me, which was I got to leave on my own accord. And then I regrouped with my mom, but she was like, oh, I'm so excited. And I'm like, I can't trust you. I had to figure out my own road. And my dad had to, eventually, years later, I think, let's see, 1990, so I was like 18 or so, 19, and about 22 or 23, so 3 or 4 years later, he had on his own accord read books and come to the conclusion that Scientology wasn't for him either. And now I have a beautiful relationship with both of my mom and my dad, and we can talk about Scientology in a much more open way than the context of what we knew when we were in.
So tell me, what do you think now at November of 2012 over what you've experienced in Scientology and looking forward, like looking into the future? What is your perception? What do you
of Scientology?
Yeah, and your friends who are still in, and because it seems to me like there's more and more people willing to go public talking about the criminal activities they did as senior officials of Scientology. More and more books are coming out. There's going to be another book by an ex-Scientologist, Jenna Miscavige Hill, has a book coming out soon. I see Lawrence Wright has a book coming out soon, and Tony Ortega, the former editor of the Village Voice, has a book project as well. So, just say whatever you want to say to anyone who may be watching this, who may be thinking of going in, who might be thinking of leaving, or who,
Well, for Scientology, I think that for me growing up, I was never witness to any of those bad things. I certainly read about them, understand, and there are some horrific things that Scientology is engaged in from everything I can see and understand. But when I was public, I had this sort of wonderful view of it, and I can imagine for those, and see even current friends or people that I knew as friends, still have that sort of cloud of belief that everything is, if you do it right, it'll all work out. Having been on the other side and having seen different things come out in the different books that you mentioned, seeing the movie The Master, which I thought was pretty impressive, it helped open up a lot of things about what that Scientology feels like it's waning, that it will suffer and eventually not be able to make it. So it makes it difficult for anybody to carry forward. And how do you hold on to something as it feels like it might be crashing? But I guess there might be those ardent few that say, hey, we still believe, but at some point that community becomes less and less and less. All that I can say, though, is that there is an incredible community of those, and like Marc Headley, who was a high school friend of mine who I know, finding those reconnections of people and old friends that now being on the other side, there's still a whole community out there.
So Marc Headley left with his wife Claire, I believe, and wrote a book called Blown for Good.
That's right.
I believe. And say a few words about Marc and what you know of him. Is he a good guy?
Marc's a great guy. I knew Marc extremely well, an hysterical individual and a very creative and capable fellow. In his book Blown for Good, he talks about his whole experience of how and when he got in, and he was also born and raised, well, not born, but he was raised in a similar environment as I was. And for me, I had a reason to go to University of College, and I had left because of Saxon and all this stuff. Marc didn't have that, and so he stayed within and then joined the Sea Org, and has many of the people, and some of the people that I knew in high school that also joined. And he worked hard to do the right thing and was very capable all the way through 2005. And then he was he was up lines. He was in Hemet Springs living a life of misery. I mean,
for people who don't know what Hemet Springs is.
So that's where David Miscavige and all of the most senior officials, and it would have been, as a Scientologist, was always considered confidential. And I don't know how confidential it is now, but certainly for me it doesn't feel as confidential. But that's where the uplines, where Golden Era Productions, and all of
Tom Cruise would go there, and
they would get there and get some special treatment or whatnot, and all of the very senior, the RTC is up there, and so this is the most senior levels of Sea Org, and Marc Headley was part of that. He was helping with the Golden Era Productions, and he was witness to many things. But from anybody that's in the Sea Org that had joined the Sea Org, it's a very tough life, and it's a
billion-year contract.
It's a billion-year contract.
So you're not just being asked to commit to this lifetime, but all your future lifetimes.
Yeah. You have to think about each somehow. And I don't know of anybody that says this is my second lifetime.
One of my favorite books is Nancy Maney's book, My Billion-Year Contract, who did a lot of the criminal activities when she was an OSA Guardian member.
I got to read that.
Yeah.
But it is it's a very tough life, and for those that haven't been in Scientology, you're getting paid very poor pay. You get one day off maybe every other week. You work 14 to 16-hour days, and if your stats aren't up, you don't get you can put on the RPF, the Rehabilitation Project Force, which is just this awful, horrific space to be in. And there are many people, and I knew growing up, you could see it. They had a band on their arm, and they were treated. They weren't to be talked to.
And I just want to intercede for just 1 second and say that a sociologist named Stephen Kent, that I respect a lot, he's Canadian, wrote a paper called Brainwashing in the RTF that's on the internet. Stephen Kent, StephenKent. If you do a search in quotes, brainwashing in the RTF, it's really worth reading, and it's absolutely definitive that it is brainwashing.
RPF? Rehabilitation Project
I'm
Force?
sorry, RPF.
Yeah, okay.
I misspoke. Thanks for correcting me. And that just gets back to the whole issue that the Moonies, the group that I was in, and Scientology and many other groups say brainwashing doesn't exist, or the CIA does brainwashing but we don't. You know, what I urge everyone to do is actually look at the research, read the documentation of what is mind control, what is brainwashing on the continuum of influence.
Certainly education is key and critical for anybody looking, or whether you're in or out or considering to go in. The more you know, the better you can make a decision.
Right. So if I can put you on the hot seat for a second, what do you think of L. Ron Hubbard now at this point in your life?
Growing up, I had actually the movie The Master did a phenomenal job of representing L. Ron Hubbard by Philip Seymour Hoffman, did Lancaster Dodd, who looked and acted a lot like I envisioned L. Ron Hubbard. And
see, I disagree with you. I thought they were way too generous.
And
he was not nearly psychotic enough and weird enough.
But that was my image as a child.
Okay, that's fine.
I mean, however, the reality of it, and certainly I've seen videos of him where he looks way out there.
Yeah, I highly recommend The Shrinking World of L. Ron Hubbard.
Okay.
Black and white, where they actually interview Hubbard in 1968, a British documentary.
Oh, really?
It's on znewtv.com. The Shrinking World of L. Ron
Okay,
Hubbard.
I'll
Anyway,
look at
you like the
I liked it because as a child, that was how it was conveyed to me. That the way they portrayed him, that was how I got to understand him. Even though I understand the reality, having read Russell Miller's Barefaced Messiah, and there were a lot of things out there that you could just see the real con artist nature of who he was. And even in the movie you could see a little bit of that, but they made him into this very nice, likable guy.
Yeah.
And that's how I knew him as a child, and when I was in Scientology. And certainly any of my friends would have, I think, would have concurred with that particular.
So you related to that.
Oh.
That's interesting, because I've seen the movie with several other ex-Scientologists, and you're the first person to represent, that
and maybe it was just
liked the movie and that you thought, and it's great. I just
being as a child, that was
yourself. What do you think of Hubbard, the real L. Ron Hubbard?
Well, so having done a lot of looking and reading and coming at the other side, he was much more of a con artist and somebody who was working to manipulate and to control, and that's you know, at the core of who he was. I mean, that just seemed to be what he was trying to do. I think he had some success. He really relied heavily on whatever charisma he could muster. And he had a lot of people that were underneath him. When he was around, there were a lot of number twos that kind of came and went. David Miscavige, during the time that his death, I mean, after a power struggle with Pat and Annie Broker, who were supposedly the guardians. Technically, Pat and Annie were supposed to have the real ownership of it, but that was lost. David Miscavige got it. And David Miscavige just doesn't have the charisma that L. Ron Hubbard. But altogether, he's dead. I mean, it hasn't carried forward, and it's Scientology, I don't think, has been able to maintain itself. It's lost a lot.
Did you ever read John Atek's book, A Piece of Blue Sky? Because for me, that's the most definitive book. I believe Russell Miller actually used most of John Atek's material when he wrote The Barefaced Messiah. But if anyone wants to know what I believe to be the most definitive, well-researched, well-documented book, it's John's Piece of Blue Sky, and I'm hoping that he's going to re-release it with all of the footnotes and extra notes that didn't come out in the original. But coming back, can I ask you to talk about Delphi? Like, what's wrong with Delphi?
See, I always have trouble with people say what's wrong with these, because well, because for me as a Scientologist, or as a former Scientologist, I did value a lot of different things. I valued some of the experience. It was so painful, though, for me to leave, and that was probably the most difficult thing. For Delphi, it's a very independent sort of, it's a lot like homeschooling, because you get your check sheets, you do your course material, you're kind of left yourself, you do a twin or you get partnered with somebody, and you go through whatever it is. I can't necessarily say that for me, and I graduated in 1990, and Delphi was just working its way up. I know that Delphi really tries to promote a lot of its statistics to show how they're improving. But it was, I did not get it. I mean, I went to University of New Hampshire, so I did go to UNH, but I did not actually get accepted initially. My transcripts weren't accepted. I had to go part-time to demonstrate myself to be a good student, and then they accepted me and I was able to finish.
Yeah, that's what I've heard from other people I've met who went to Delphi, that their educational standards were not up to where they should have been given their age level if they had been in.
Yeah, I didn't. I mean, it was for me. I had to. I did not get as probably as rounded. I don't know. I mean, I don't have enough of that. I was able to get through. I did well in college. I mean, what Delphi will promote is study skills, and you know, your lack of math, misunderstood words, skip gradient, those 3 barriers to study, and you learn those, and I know them, and I've used them, and they've been useful. I can't say that they're not useful, but the extent of what I've gained and learned, I mean, I made it, I got through, and I got into college, so it worked out at the end.
Right, and you keep reading, you love to learn.
Yeah, I believe life is all about learning and growing and continuing to see what you can gain. And I like looking beyond Scientology or Delphi. And I certainly wouldn't, I mean, I've made a conscious effort to make sure my kids are not exposed to Scientology or Delphi. I wouldn't put them in those schools. I'm much happier with the education they're getting, and we're being very involved throughout their education.
And so what's your impressions now, having left Scientology, with mental health professionals? I understand you actually did a talk for some psychiatrists in training at one of the major hospitals here in Boston.
Well, on a personal level, when having left psychiatrists, because it was such an ingrained message for me not to go to psychiatrists, they are the enemy, they're the people that are essentially all SPs, suppressive persons, and there are these awful individuals, and so having that implanted in my head, it was very hard for me to go. And I had personal needs, going to college and falling in love for the first time and crashing and that not working and going into a failed marriage. There was a lot of things where I needed to figure myself out, and getting some real support was a challenge, because I didn't have Scientology, which I would have gone to, and so now I'm having to find something else. I had found some very good psychiatrists and different psychologists. I got to see you for a little bit, and it's a part of it, and trying to find my own piece of it. Now, I've been actually...
So you didn't get cooties?
I didn't get cooties. No.
I think you read my first book.
That was probably, that was one of the more initial, when I was first reading, amongst the books that I read, Combating Cult Mind Control. At the time, my only critique was that it mentioned Scientology.
Yeah.
It was hard. It was fascinating for me to read it in the context of it, so applicable to somebody being in a cult and coming out of it, and I so identified with it. And I was so happy that it wasn't about Scientology. Then eventually it did mention Scientology, and I was like, oh.
Yeah, okay. I had like 1 or 2 references.
Just a very minor references.
But I want to just mention that my publisher made me take out Hannah Whitfield's story out of chapter 5. It was actually in my version of the book, and for legal reasons, my publisher made me take out Hannah Whitfield's story.
Was it Scientology, or?
Yeah, she was the captain of his boats. She was one of the senior officials of Scientology.
So that's why it was...
So we wound up just putting a couple of mentions. But it's funny because when the book first came out in 1988, I started getting hundreds of letters from people in the Jehovah's Witnesses.
Oh, yeah.
Who were like, your book is amazing, I underlined the whole thing, how come you didn't mention the Jehovah's Witnesses? And at the time, I was like, why? Are they a cult? And they were like, are you kidding, dude? It was like, I underlined the whole book, and I was like, teach me.
Wow.
But they said the book helped so many people get out of the Jehovah's Witnesses because I had no mention of the Jehovah's Witnesses whatsoever. So it
made it clean.
Okay.
It was easy to read.
It was about this guy in the Moonies.
Right, and nothing to do with Jehovah's Witness, and then you're like, oh my gosh, it's exactly about Jehovah's Witness.
Exactly.
And it's about Scientology. It's about all of these different things, and so it's phenomenal to read. And so having done it, but going back to your earlier question, I've had opportunity to present to a group of psychiatrists in Boston, which. It was, one of those things like,
they were fourth-year residents, if I remember.
Yeah, they're fourth-year residents. These are people going into psychiatry, trying to help people.
Part of their training.
And for Scientology, that's like, whoa, these are the worst people to talk to.
Yeah, they rape and they electroshock and they drug.
All these awful things. Yeah, that's what they're supposed to do. And I had the opportunity to show them what it means to be in Scientology, what they're perceived as from a Scientology perspective, and how to approach them. Scientologists. And it is tough because the way Scientology has structured that dialogue, which is they are the sworn enemy, which kind of puts them, they're not trying to attack. They're trying to help, at least was what I could see, and having personal experience with psychiatrists. I do struggle with the idea of psychiatric drugs, and that's certainly something that was ingrained in me, and I probably still do.
I struggle with it too, and I'm a mental health professional. In fact, I like Peter Bregan's work, who's a psychiatrist who's very critical of the pharmaceutical industry's lobbying pressure to try to overprescribe.
You and Scientology have something in common.
Absolutely. Well, Scientology also outed the early CIA mind control research, which I have to thank Scientology for doing, because the facts are the facts.
Right.
But the point is, because I've spoken to the same group of people as well as psychiatrists in training, and there really is an emphasis now to do more therapy, even though the managed care industry doesn't want to pay psychiatrists for spending time to actually talk and relate to people. But most of the new trainees know the value of the relationship, the therapeutic relationship, and don't want to just write a prescription. They actually want to help people get control of their own thoughts and feelings and live a happy and healthy life.
Yeah, no, and it's a very important... Anyway, so yeah, it's very good that these guys are learning and they're looking to reach out. They're looking to understand Scientology, not just as these awful people, and we're all humans, whether you're a psychiatrist or Scientologist, and we're all trying to grow, we're all trying to learn, and if you can look beyond it.
Exactly, and I guess we're going to need to wrap up soon because I have another appointment, but I want to mention ex-Scientologykids.org, which is a website that's been put up by some ex-Scientology kids.
So we went to Delphi Academy.
Jenna Miscavige-Hill and Astra Woodcraft, I believe. And I'm forgetting the third person.
I know, but I think
so please forgive me. But the point is information is something that we need to look at, evaluate whether or not it's credible or not, and what is the source, and is there an agenda, and is there verifiable facts, and trust that we can figure out what's real and what isn't real. And when a group says you can't talk to ex-members because they're SPs, the suppressive people, you can't talk to Steve Hassan because he's a suppressive person, someone is making the decision for you of who you can talk to, or you know, what books to read, and that's censorship, and that's on a very simplistic level. Anyone who's trying to exercise information control is trying to influence your mind. And I really believe that in the intelligence of people and the wisdom of people, that people should trust their inner voice and their inner gut feeling, and that if a group is legitimate, it will stand up to scrutiny.
Sure.
So any last words before we finish for our viewing audience?
For me, having gone and left, I mean, it's a very tender portion of my life, having been born and raised. I do appreciate the friends that I had, the community that I knew, and I'm sorry that for whatever reasons, well, because I had left, I made that choice to, oh, well, then you don't want to talk anymore. I actually did want to be part of that community, and I hope that anybody that's in that community, you know, recognizes that there is another place outside, and that there's plenty of people to talk to, and it's, you know, it's the place to grow and learn. Yeah,
and there's life after group involvement.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in fact, life is much better outside of an authoritarian, you know, regime.
Sure, absolutely.
So thanks so much. Thank you for coming down.
Hey, thank you.
Talk to you soon.
All right.
Bye, everybody.